Hi kids, welcome to Storytime with Aunt Juliana. Today we're reading Mystery at Pony Ranch by Agnes Goosen, published by Moody Press. Chapter 4, A Pony of His Very Own. When the doctor stopped by next morning, Anthony was dressed for his second ride in the cart. Sweet Pea was hitched to a post waiting. Anthony and Grandfather Merriman were finishing breakfast in the kitchen. The doctor stopped just inside the door. "Well, what goes on here?" "Just trying the fresh air cure, Doctor," said Mr. Merriman, "and it works." "It does it?" The doctor was pleased, though he pretended to be upset. "If this is the way you Merrimans behave behind my back, then from now on you're on your own." Anthony wasn't sorry to see the last of Dr. Frame. As a doctor he was nice enough, but no more needles sticking into a fellow, no more awkward questions to answer. "If you're ready, we'll have lesson 1 in pony boyship," said Mr. Merriman with a twinkle in his eye to Anthony. Grandfather Merriman was an awfully good teacher. "The way to begin is to train one pony by yourself, John," he said. "Learn to handle him, get him accustomed to you, and then to his harness." "You mean break him and everything, Grandfather?" Mr. Merriman smiled. "You'll find most ponies so tamed they will hardly need breaking, but they do need training. After breakfast we'll go out to the pasture, and you can choose which pony you'd want for your very own." He said it in such a way, Anthony John puzzled over the words. Grandfather hadn't said, "You can pick a pony for your very own." He'd said, "You can choose which one you would want." Maybe he meant Anthony could have it for good. Maybe he didn't. Anthony wished he knew, but somehow he didn't like to ask straight out. Oh, but it was fun wading right into the middle of a band of ponies. Max seemed to guess what it was like for Anthony. He stayed at the outside, just thumping his tail and smiling a dog smile. The ponies were so trustful. They crowded close and nibbled at Anthony's hip pockets or at his shoulder. And Grandfather knew them all by name. This was Lily, Sweet Pea's daughter. And that was Carnation, Lily's foal. And that was Rose, Carnation's sister. And this little foal, still wobbly on his feet, was Sweet William, Carnation's son. He was born last night. "Flower names! They're all flower names!" exclaimed Anthony. He laughed outright, and Grandfather gave a quiet chuckle. "Well, I guess I like Sweet Pea best of all," said Anthony hopefully. Grandfather shook his head. "She's too old, son. Besides, there's one thing I must explain. Sweet Pea doesn't belong to me. She belongs to my absent partner." Oh. He thought that over. "Are all the others flower ponies too?" "The whole bouquet," said Grandfather with a twinkle of fun. "So you see, I can't very well give any of them away." Was Anthony sad? Not a bit. His heart zoomed. Give away. Plain as anything, Grandfather had said the words. The boy felt a thrill racing up and down and up his spine again. Eagerly he followed at Mr. Merriman's heels. "There's no hurry, you know, son," said the old man. "Learn to know ponies. Learn what to look for." He brought a pair of hand clippers in his pocket. And now he stopped beside this one or that one of the shaggiest ponies, and he snipped patches of wool from their necks and their legs. "See? Now you can see their true color, as well as their conformation. Do you know what that word means, John?" Not really." So Grandfather explained. Conformation meant general body structure. There were heavy draft ponies, like the Shetlands, and there were the light dwarfs, like the Vikings. "Vikings are the rarest breed of all," said Mr. Merriman. "Only about 100 left in all the world." He told of how the Vikings were raised on the island of Gotland, east of Sweden. For 5,000 years the ponies had lived on that island, and nowhere else until just a few years ago when some had been shipped to this continent. Most of the ponies here belong to other breeds, Welsh and Icelandic and Shetland. But how do you choose, Grandfather? What conformation is best? "Well, that depends," said Mr. Merriman. "Are you most interested in driving or riding? The short stubby ones make good riding ponies. The trotters and drivers should be a bit longer in body. But you make up your own mind. Take your time." It was a most difficult thing. Each pony looked the nicest and cutest until you saw the next one. Anthony had just about decided to wait till tomorrow before making up his mind when he saw the pony. He stood apart from all the others, and Anthony thought he looked sad and lonesome. He let Anthony walk right up to him, though, and he reached out to snuffle in Anthony's ear. Anthony snuffled right back into his ear, and he felt they were friends from that moment. The pony was a Palomino, even if he didn't look very neat just now. "What's his name, Grandfather?" "Austin." Anthony expelled his breath slowly. It wasn't Larkspur or any other flower name like that. This one didn't belong to the absent partner. Is his conformation right?" "What would you say?" said Grandfather Merriman. "Well, he's not as short as some, and I guess I might soon be too big to ride a pony, so maybe a driver would be best." Grandfather nodded, looking pleased. "You may begin his training tomorrow." "Not today?" Anthony tried not to show how disappointed he felt. Tomorrow was so far away. Well, we'll see, said Grandfather. You're supposed to have a good long rest each afternoon, Dr. Frame says. And it must be past noon now. Time for us men to churn cooks. But Grandfather didn't cook their dinner, and neither did Anthony. Just when they reached the porch, a car came swishing onto the yard. Miss Laramie climbed out, carrying a pot roast in one hand and a lemon pie in the other. She whizzed around in Grandfather's kitchen, making coffee and setting the table, and building a nest on a hot platter with gravy-coated vegetables on the outside and the pot roast in the middle. She was very gay, happy, and so was Grandfather Merriman. Anthony and I are most grateful, he said, though how you managed to desert your pupils is beyond me. This is Saturday, Miss Laramie reminded him. Ah, so it is, said Grandfather, and for some reason he sounded grumpy all of a sudden. And tomorrow will be Sunday, added Miss Laramie. How utterly surprising, said Grandfather with a dry chuckle. Miss Laramie didn't even smile at his little joke this time. So, she continued. So, said Grandfather. So what about Sunday school for John? You promised, remember? Grandfather Merriman had excuses ready. His grandson wasn't in any shape to go out yet. Dr. Freeman said he didn't think the boy should try attending school at all this spring. He couldn't drive a pony by himself, not just yet. Though, mind you, the boy was sharp and would soon make a wonderful horseman. He certainly mustn't walk 1.5 miles, not even to so important a place as Sunday school. Anthony was relieved. For a minute he'd been afraid he'd have to go. It wasn't that he didn't like Miss Laramie. He did. He liked her very much, and in a way he was very anxious to hear more about how God calls people. Over and over since that evening in her kitchen, Anthony had thought about it. Every now and then, while he was sick in bed, it must be interesting to have God speaking straight at you. But there was another thing. Miss Laramie's place was not far from one of those resort places. Most likely there'd be kids at the Sunday school, kids who had heard that Anthony John Lockerby had disappeared. Well, supposing they got to asking questions. Anthony felt safest just staying at Grandfather's. And then there was the pony Austin. If he went to Sunday school tomorrow, he might not get started in training his new pet, not until Monday. 2 whole days. So Anthony was glad Grandfather Merriman was making excuses for him. But Miss Laramie wasn't beaten. How about my dropping in for an hour? You name the most convenient time, and having a class with John alone. Mr. Merriman glanced at John. You'd like that, son? Anthony nodded, his eyes sparkling. Guess so. Guess I'd like it a lot. Grandfather smiled, but he looked queer, as if he might have taken a bite of a very sour pickle by mistake. Have it your way, Miss Strong-Mind Laramie, he said. They talked about the pony then. Miss Laramie handed out large wedges of pie, all quivery and sweet. The very first forkful of the pie helped to smooth Grandfather down. This boy has given his pick of the ponies, he said, and guess which one he chose? Austin. Not your imported Viking? Miss Laramie sounded almost shocked. The same, said Grandfather. Is he very special? Special enough, said Miss Laramie with a brisk little nod. Tell me, John, why did you choose Austin? Well, I liked his conformation, said Anthony seriously. Miss Laramie looked surprised, so he had to explain. He has long, slender legs, you know, so he'll make a good driver, and he's a palomino. Just wait till I brushed and brushed him, his tail and mane all shining in the sun. But most of all, I wanted to be friends with him, because he looked lonesome. Grandfather cleared his throat. Those are sound reasons, every one of them. I was proud to have you pick your pony so well. Happily, Anthony went back to the business of eating pie. I was terribly scared his name would be Larkspur or something, he confided. Miss Laramie was puzzled, but Grandfather threw back his head and shouted with laughter. That made Anthony laugh too, and soon Miss Laramie was joining in, even if she didn't understand about the flower ponies until Grandfather explained. It was a happy meal. After Miss Laramie had driven away, and after Anthony had had a good nap, Grandfather gave him his first lesson in training a pony. It was important, he said, not to try riding first thing. A pony may stumble, and if the rider gets thrown, both the rider and pony may be frightened. A pony doesn't forget a fright like that in a hurry. The new master and his pony should take time to get to know one another very well, said Grandfather Merriman. We'll take Austin into the barn for a few weeks. Ponies prefer the outdoors, but a few weeks of training won't hurt him. You'll feed him and clean out his stall. Yes, sir, said Anthony breathlessly. And you'll brush him and exercise him every day. Yes, sir. Yes, Grandfather. There were other rules. Always walk in front of a pony when you're leading him so he can see you. Speak to him a lot so he gets to know and trust your voice. As to the rest, well, we'll come to that in time, continued Grandfather Merriman. Here's the brush. Now go to work. Gently but firmly. That's right, John. Take out the burrs carefully, if you find any. It was work, and at first Austin shivered a bit when the curry brush bore down on his back and sides. But Grandfather said that was a sign the pony liked the brushing. At this rate, he said, Austin would soon be the handsomest pony on the place. Taking care of his very own pony was so exciting. Anthony was almost sorry to see Miss Laramie's car coming onto the yard on Sunday morning. But for one thing, Miss Laramie didn't insist on going indoors. This weather was too wonderful to be spent in a stuffy room, she said. They walked to the edge of the woods, about where Anthony John lay watching the ponies that first evening. They sat on the grass, and Mac, who had come with them, lay with his head in Anthony's lap. The windmill was squeaking and whirling again, and the water was gushing into the trough. The ponies were grazing on the far end of the pasture. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and just out of sight, a couple of birds were singing and singing. You'd almost expect their throats to burst with the sound. Then Miss Laramie began singing too. This was lovelier than birds, soft, soft almost as a breeze. It didn't stop the birds, not for 1 minute, but it did send shivers of happiness along Anthony's spine. He had to admit, though, that the Bible lesson was best of all. Miss Laramie had a board with her all covered with soft cloth. As she told the story, she began building a picture. There was a lake and a shoreline and some fleecy clouds in the sky, just like those up there in the real sky today. The picture kept growing. Now there were boats near the shore, and in the boats some fishermen were washing their nets, stooping over the side of the boat to do it. She told of 2 sets of brothers who lived near Lake Galilee in Palestine many years ago. There were Peter and Andrew, and James and John. They were fishing partners. Catching fish was the only way they had of making a living. But one day Jesus came walking along the shore. "Come, follow me," he called. And what did they do? They left their boats and their nets and everything, and they followed him. They went where he went. They slept where he slept. They listened to him talk. It was like camping and going to school, an exciting school. They watched him heal the sick. Oh, ever so many sick people. The lame and the blind and the deaf. Some were almost dying. They were so sick. And Jesus had only to say a single word, and they were all well again. That's the end of chapter 4.